Hi, my name is Delan Padiz, and this is my presentation for Abnormal Psychology. Today I'll be going over the movie Good Will Hunting, written by Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, and its depiction of post-traumatic stress disorder. So the character I'll be going over in Good Will Hunting is Will Hunting, played by Matt Damon, a 20-year-old orphan from South Boston and a janitor at MIT. So what is extremely special about him is that he has an extraordinary genius level IQ, and he is well rounded in mathematics, science, history, literature, and more. And also, his past is filled with childhood abuse. So, at MIT, he secretly solves a graduate level equation and gets discovered by one of the professors there. And, when he's free, he spends time with friends driving around, like hanging out at bars, meeting girls, and causing trouble. And eventually, this trouble leads him into jail and for attacking another man, a police officer. And the professor helps him by making a deal with him for helping with studies on the requirement that Will has to meet with a therapist. So the two characters I want to gloss over is Sean Maguire and Skylar. The therapist is Sean Maguire. He's played by Robin Williams, and he's a community college professor and becomes the therapist for Will after several other people gave up on him. And he's genuinely dedicated for helping Will and for, you know, he cares to like push him forward. And he's the most understanding character out of everyone. And the final character I want to go over is Skylar, who is Will's girlfriend, and she is a British orphan about to graduate Harvard, and she's going to Stanford Medical School, and she wants to understand Will and his past, but this creates like a future problem and issue with their relationship. So, as you know, I'll be going over post-traumatic stress disorder, and that is what I diagnosed Will with. And I'll be going over a list of symptoms of PTSD presented with clear examples from the movie and the treatment methods used in the movie. So Will Hunting fits the PTSD criteria A for exposure to actual threat and death, serious injury, or sexual violence. So the main source of Will's PTSD and his childhood abuse is like from his foster father beating him daily. And, in the images shown here, Will has been stabbed, beaten, and burned by cigarettes. And he told a story about his father and that he would like put down a belt, stick, or wrench for Will to choose, and Will would defiantly pick the wrench. And his entire life as an orphan just did not lead to any positive experience, which explains the trauma and his PTSD. So moving on, he has the qualification for criteria B, and that's because he is experiencing intrusion symptoms. And when he discussed his childhood abuse with Sean Maguire, he vividly recalled a memory of his foster father coming upstairs to beat him, shown in the two images shown here. And when moments bring up any reminder of his past, Will gets extremely angry. Will also fits criteria C because he is experiencing persistent avoidance of stimuli, and we can see that a lot in the movie because he dodges any opportunity to speak about his past, and he only speaks when he wants to speak. And one of his sessions, he didn't talk for the entire session because he simply didn't want to. And because of his persistent avoidance, he has created defense mechanisms. For example, he makes jokes to avoid his emotions and his trauma, and he uses anger to avoid talking in like certain situations. And furthermore, he sabotages his relationships before they can be turned into like something important. So, as I just stated, as a defense mechanism, he destroys relationships with anger so they don't pry into his past. And this is seen directly in the movie when Skylar wants to try to understand Will more, and because, he refused to come with her to California, but she started asking him questions, causing him to have an intense, like, state of rage. And he got triggered by the words, like, what are you afraid of? I just want to help you, and, like, I want to understand. And this ended up having Will break up with Skylar, and it ruined their relationship because he didn't want her to ask about his past or help him. So Will fits most with criteria D because he has negative alterations in cognitions and mood because of his trauma. He suffers from persistent and exaggerated negative beliefs and expectations about himself and in the world. For example, he has no trust in adult figures and authorities. He has a negative mindset, which basically states, like, oh, people abandon me, leave me, and turn against me. And, if you have enough of those experiences, they start to affect how you perceive the world. And he thought Skylar would inevitably leave him, and, his only relationships that he has are with the boys who have a strong sense of loyalty with him. And overall, this whole mindset causes him to not experience like that many positive emotions, and Sean concludes that, he's just a scared kid who doesn't know how to live his like own life. And for criteria E, he has worsened reactivity due to his childhood trauma. He clearly shows a more irritable side of him most of the time, and he's very impulsive. He is very aggressive and has a hard time maintaining control over himself. He gets angry like in bursts, and for example, he beats up the man who used to beat him up when he was a kid, and that led him into court for assault, which snowballed the entire movie. And as the judge stated, he is known for several cases of assault and Grand Theft Auto. And overall, anger furthers ruins his relationships with those who try to get close to him. And finally, criteria F, he has a duration of symptoms which have lasted longer than a month. It's lasted a majority of his lifetime. So here I'll be showing the most well-known scene from Good Will Hunting. It's the most emotional one, and people call it the "It's Not Your Fault" scene. So.
What is that?
This is your file. I have to send it back to the judge for evaluation.
Oh. Hey, you're not gonna fail me, are you? What's it say?
Want to read it?
Why? Have you had any, experience with that?
20 years of counseling. Yeah, I've seen some pretty awful shit.
I mean, have you had any experience with that?
Personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have.
Sure ain't good.
My father was an alcoholic. Mean fucking drunk. He'd come home hammered, looking to wail on somebody. So I'd provoke him so he wouldn't go after my mother and little brother. The interesting nights were when he wore his rings.
Yeah, he used to just put a wrench, a stick, and a belt on the table and just say choose.
Well, I gotta go with the belt there, Vanna.
I used to go with the wrench.
Why the wrench?
Because fuck him, that's why.
Your foster father.
Yeah. So, what is it, like, Will has an attachment disorder? Is it all that stuff? Fear of abandonment? Is that why I broke up with Skylar?
I didn't know you had.
I did.
You want to talk about it?
No.
Hey, Will. I don't know a lot. You see this? All this shit. This is not your fault. Look at me, son. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
I know.
No, you don't. It's not your fault.
I know.
It's not your fault.
All right.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me. It's not your fault.
Don't fuck with me, all right? Don't fuck with me, Sean, not you.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault.
Oh my God. Oh my God, I'm so sorry.
Fuck them, okay?
What is that?
Okay. So on this clip, they discuss their problems that they've had when they were children, and it also shows how, along with his PTSD, he also has a possible attachment disorder. But I wanted to cover his PTSD since it seemed to be the most clear option. And Sean discusses how it's not, you know, his fault, it's not Will's fault. And in the scene, for the first time, they have emotional barriers um, that Will has, and they're finally torn down because they can actually have like a discussion without challenging each other, and it shows catharsis where Will can release his strongly repressed emotions over his entire life. And when Sean said it wasn't his fault, um it broke down his defense mechanisms, and it slowly went from like Will joking it to the side and like to aggression by asking Sean to stop messing with him, and then acceptance with a full wave of emotion that we've never seen in the entire movie. And it shows how much he's been through, and that's one of the biggest scenes of the film. It's a whole turning point that everything has built up to. And all right, finally moving on to the treatment in this film. So the psychological treatment method in this film was mainly talk therapy. All of the sessions like incorporated talk therapy with Sean, and Sean would learn about him, like Will as a person, and Will's past, and Will in his daily life, and how he interacts with his relationships. And they also acknowledge, Will's gift that he has, and how Will has a choice with what to do with his life. And overall, the therapy would be sort of challenging for Sean initially, because Will is a genius and he knows how to not cooperate, especially with all of his defense mechanisms in play. And for the psychological treatments, like prior to Sean, Will went to a psychiatrist and a hypnosis therapist, and they both gave up on Will, as Will intended. He like messed with them, and I believe they had at least 5 therapists before Sean McGuire. So this is the accuracy section. The movie depicted Will Hunting having PTSD, and it was very noticeable how his childhood trauma affected his daily life, and especially with the relationships and like what he wants to do with his own life. And it shows how his state of mind has become normal to him, and that it's just how he naturally acts for the other characters who already know him. It's not a stereotypical depiction of PTSD. And the inaccuracy, there's only really one where it has Sean choking Will in the session room when Will disrespected his wife, and that just isn't allowed. Like, that's a whole lawsuit. And more treatments would be used to help Will rather than just talk therapy. I would expect cognitive behavioral therapy or exposure therapy, where Will can experience his trauma in a useful way and like in a controlled, safe environment to accept his past. And it would also help take away his defense mechanisms and the negative mindset that he has on himself and the world. So finally, my personal takeaway is that this is like one of the greatest movies out there, in my opinion. And like regarding mental illness, it perfectly depicts like a young troubled man, and they can seem normal to others, but is bottling up all of his trauma inside. And some people believe that gifted people can't have problems, and I like how the movie shows how his mental illness can affect like anyone. And because he's a gifted individual with intelligence, but he has like the struggles that all of us can have. And with mental illness, it just shows how his relationships are like hurt because of it. And I just really enjoy how it seems that everyone wanted to push him forward because he's special, but you know, in the end, he still made it his choice on like how to decide how to live his life. And you know, overall, it's a great movie, and I diagnosed Will with PTSD. Thank you for your time.